Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello, and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley. As always, I'm always so happy to have you here. I am deeply honored to have your listenership, and I sure hope that this episode provides you with some value today. We are living in very interesting and challenging times, aren't we? For anyone who listens to this maybe months down the road, this episode is being recorded about a month in to experiencing kind of this corona pandemic in the United States. I know it started a lot earlier elsewhere in the world, but here in the US, we've really been rumbling with it for the past month. And absolutely, it is scary. It is challenging. There is a lot of uncertainty about how this is all going to play out. And simultaneously, I, for one, am working really hard at making the most of it. And I say that I'm working really hard because it is work to pivot my thinking to focus on the good in this. It is work to navigate a new routine, right? Because most of us had our routines completely torn up overnight. It's work to allow myself moments of grieving things, unmet expectations and losses, specifically around freedom, that I really don't have much control over. But it is work to allow myself to feel difficult things and simultaneously keep showing up for my life. In our home, I will tell you that my husband and I are both self-employed, which sounds really nice, but there are most definitely a lot of challenges that come with that, even when life is, normal, whatever that is. But we are both very fortunate to still be working. And like many of you, we now have the added challenge of homeschooling our child. And like everyone, our routine, our life as we know it is very disrupted, which I don't think is all bad. Having my son home during the day definitely adds a layer of responsibility, of work, of, just challenge, for lack of a better word. And simultaneously, it's such a beautiful thing to have him home. I get to have lunch with him. We get to take recesses together, which I'm personally loving. I'm letting myself work for, a period of time, and then we're taking scheduled recesses together to play and just connect and enjoy each other's company. He has baby chicks right now. We decided this was a good time to start, build a chicken coop and raise chickens. And it's been a lot of fun. He's been begging us for years to do it. We used to have chickens years ago, and then we moved. And so now is a great opportunity for him to be leaning into that. And the other day at lunch, he brought me a little chick to my desk, which, those things just don't happen during my normal work day. So I find it fascinating that we're being presented with an opportunity to lean more heavily into a lot of things that we all too often restrict when life is running at full capacity. Right? When we're in the normal hustle and bustle of our everyday lives, we tend to restrict things like sleep and play and creativity and connection with other people. We might be working with other people, talking to other people, but in many cases, we're not often connecting. So I know there's a downside to all of this. I am not in any way trying to minimize that. And simultaneously, there is also an invitation in this. Life is funny like that. It's a paradox. And I know that if where I choose to put my time and attention is mostly in the camp of focusing on the downside, I will sink very quickly. And so I am working to keep my time, energy, and focus directed towards the invitation of this. And I want to speak into that a little bit more today. I want to speak into the process of reorienting yourself when life changes, or as I always use in my courses and classes, I always say when life throws you a curveball. Because life has done just that, right? It's thrown us a curveball, something that we really did not see coming, and it just caught us off guard. The truth is, as humans, we don't really like change. We like predictability because things we can predict feel more safe. And it's very easy right now for an unmanaged mind to easily go into freak out mode, to easily get overly stressed, overly worried. And I just want to remind you that that is certainly an option to go there, but it's not very helpful. What is helpful in times like these is parenting our brain, specifically your lizard brain, right? That part of your brain that is so primal that all it really cares about is your survival. And so it's very easy for that part of our brain to freak out. And it's our job with the other parts of our brain, specifically your prefrontal cortex, to remind that lizard brain of all the reasons why you are safe, of all the reasons that you do have control, even in this moment. Obviously, you don't have control over what's happening in terms of the pandemic, but to tell yourself that you have absolutely no control in your life is dangerous and unhelpful and simply not true. So we have to be willing to kind of parent ourselves, right? Talk ourselves through this, work ourselves through this. And it always makes me think of, when my son was really little, like so many parents, we went through phases where he was afraid to go to bed, right? There were monsters in the closet. There were things under the bed. There were weird noises outside. And so my job as his mother was to kind of talk him through the fact that we can let our imagination go wild and come up with all these scary scenarios and worst case thinking, or we can focus on just what is true in this very moment. And a lot of nights, of course, most nights when I was talking my son through this, through his fear of being in his room alone, what was true of the moment was that we were in a safe home. He was in a warm bed. He was surrounded by people and things that loved him. My husband and I were just around the corner in the other room. And just reminding him of what is absolutely true in this moment helped to calm his fears, helped to redirect his focus, and ultimately helped him go to sleep. And I feel like I've been coaching a lot of women over the past few weeks in a very similar way, right? A lot of us have these imaginary monsters in the closet right now. We're playing out worst case scenario, all the things that could happen. And, there is a degree of worry that I do believe is helpful to a point. But we can worry ourselves into very dark and unhelpful places. There's a fine line between worry allowing you to kind of prepare and kind of come up with a plan B, and where you take that worry so far that you actually become paralyzed to take any kind of action. And only you know where you are on the spectrum of worry. But I would definitely check in with yourself around that. So what I've been reminding a lot of my clients of recently is what is true on this day in terms of their reality. Yes, it is a reality that we are all collectively dealing with the corona pandemic. And it is also true that many of us are in the safety of our homes with a lot of modern day conveniences. Our families are safe and healthy. I'm not saying all. I know a lot of you, I have clients who have children in the medical field. I have a lot of clients who work in the medical field. So, I'm not at all suggesting that this is everyone's current reality. But focusing on what is true for you on this day, in this moment, is powerful. Because you are safe right now. Listening to this podcast, I'm pretty sure that you are not fighting for your life right now. And based on your current reality, you can then start to ask yourself, what's the next right move based on where I currently am in this moment? It's very easy to focus on everything that is wrong with our current reality. But it is our reality. And the sooner that we stop fighting reality, because let's be honest, you will never win that argument, right? You will never win the argument with reality. Reality always wins. But the sooner that you stop fighting reality, the easier time you will have navigating your way through it. Because think about it, right? Fighting reality takes a lot of resources from you. It takes a lot of mental power. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of focus that you could be putting elsewhere in spaces and places where it actually makes a difference. When we accept reality, what is currently happening, and stop fighting it, the calmer we are and the more control we feel that we have. No, you can't control what's happening out in the world in terms of the pandemic, but of course you can control how you choose to live this day despite what's going on in the world. And what I mean by that specifically is you can control how you show up today. You can control how you spend your time today. You can control your emotional landscape, how you feel today. You can control what you choose to focus on today. So, a great question that I've been throwing out to a lot of my clients over the past few weeks is, how do you need to show up today in order to go to bed tonight feeling at peace with how you lived your day? And it's funny because even though I've been using this question a lot in the past few weeks, it's a question that I've been asking my clients for years. It's such a great question to be asking you because it really asks you where the intentionality is in how you're choosing to live your life. Now, how you choose to live your day today, please don't hear me speaking to productivity. And don't assume that I'm not speaking to productivity. I'm not speaking against it. I'm not speaking for it. And here's why I think that's important to speak into is I see very two opposite ends of the spectrum in the conversation around, how to live your day right now. I see this conversation that you don't need to do anything, right? Like just be in it, just like survive, just get through the day. And then I see the other end of the spectrum, like now is the time to write the book, learn the skill, do all the things. And the funny thing about spectrums is there's always middle ground. And as humans, I don't know why we tend to obsess about the ends of the spectrum, but they are usually not the best places to live, right? At one end of the spectrum or the other. There is a middle ground. There are sweet spots in the center that are a lot more enjoyable to live in. So, I would just ask yourself today, where are you on that spectrum? Are you on the end of the spectrum of feeling like, absolutely, there's nothing I can do, I'm just going to give up until all this passes? Or are you at the end of the spectrum where you're focusing so much on productivity and accomplishing things almost as an avoidance tactic? Or are you somewhere else on the spectrum? My hope is it's somewhere else. But here's what I want you to hear. No one can tell you how to show up right now. No one can tell you how you need to show up to live your day in order to feel at peace tonight with how you showed up. That's between you and you. That is self-leadership, my friends. You have to decide how you want to show up. You have to decide what works best for you. Maybe you need to have a good cry today. Maybe you need to call a girlfriend. Maybe you need to go for a walk by yourself to get away from your family. Maybe you need to sit down and organize yourself, tackle a project, or maybe you need to move your body. Maybe that workout is a really good idea today. I don't know what you need to do to finish this day feeling strong and feeling at peace with how you lived it. And please don't hear me saying that when you end the day at peace with how you lived it, it doesn't necessarily mean that you felt peaceful all day. In fact, it probably means that you pushed yourself into some arenas of discomfort, right? I'm not saying ignore what's happening in the world at all. All I'm suggesting is that you take responsibility for how you're showing up in the current reality. So while I don't know what you need to do to go to bed tonight feeling at peace with how you showed up, I do know that you owe it to yourself to decide what that looks like for you. So I did an entire podcast on that you owe it to yourself to decide a while ago. I think it was episode 185. But listen to that. If you're somebody who never really makes a decision, listen to that episode. Because I think it's really easy at times like this to just not decide about anything. It's like a waiting game. And indecision is exhausting. It is very energy consuming. You think you're saving yourself energy by not making a decision, but I actually find the opposite is true for a lot of people. So I have long preached the power of starting your day with the end in mind. And I think that this is one of the most powerful things you could do right now to reorient yourself at a time where everything is so disorienting. And the only way you can start your day with the end in mind, of course, is to create a little bit of time and space for yourself at the start of the day. And why is that important? Well, it's important because that's how you get straight with yourself. I know this is an overly used cliche, but it's literally the practice of putting on your oxygen mask before you put on somebody else's, right? The other way I say this to a lot of my students is that, you need to put your own head on straight. You need to save yourself before you go out and try to save the world. The other way that I like to think of our morning time or some time dedicated for you getting straight with you in the morning is it's an act of decluttering. It's a practice of tidying up your internal space. Right? I think most of us by now understand the power of decluttering our physical space. But what I'm speaking to in terms of dedicating some time to yourself in the morning to get straight with yourself is developing a practice of decluttering your internal landscape. Getting yourself focused, getting yourself grounded, asking yourself how you want to show up in this day. What are the things in your mind, in your mental arena that you love, that are serving you, that you want to keep? And what are the things you can let go of? That's what decluttering is. It doesn't have to be just a physical activity. It is very much a mental activity. So the definition of clutter is a large amount of things that are not arranged in a neat or orderly way. A crowded or disordered collection of things. And so, yes, of course, we know what a decluttered room looks like. Well, I think a lot of our brains look like that. I know mine does. If I do not take some control and responsibility for organizing my brain, it is a very crowded and disordered collection of things, many of which are not serving me in any way. So we've done several episodes on the power of decluttering, even physical space. I've had Evan Zislis, who is a kind of decluttering expert on the show twice. He showed up in episode 41 and 78. So if you want some, more inspiration on that conversation of physical clutter, you can check those out. But less clutter, be it mental or physical, allows you to live more aligned with the person you want to be. And clutter is anything that stands in between you and the life that you truly want to be living. And while you don't have the freedom right now to go out and physically live life in all the ways that you did just a few weeks ago, you still absolutely have a choice in how you're living your day, in terms of how you're showing up, the energy you're bringing to the table, what you're focusing on, where you're spending your time. So with morning time, starting your day with the end in mind, to me, means that you dedicate a little bit of time to getting your head on straight in terms of getting yourself focused and grounded. That looks like a different practice for everybody. Some people meditate, some people journal, some people exercise. I don't know what that looks like for you, but a practice of focus and groundedness can be so impactful in how you show up for your day. Starting your day with the end in mind also means that you know what's important for you today, right? You get yourself organized. You set intentions for how you want to show up mentally and physically. And let's be honest, you can never start the day with the end in mind, not really in a powerful way, if you don't acknowledge that a powerful morning practice starts the night before. If you're not giving yourself a decent bedtime to get adequate sleep, you will never be inspired to get up with enough time to do the things that will help you end the day feeling at peace with how you lived it. So this is why I always emphasize the power of a bedtime and giving yourself enough sleeping hours. If you're somebody who wants to be motivated to get up and get yourself straight before you start the day, you've got to get enough sleep. So I'm going to tell you, I did a Facebook Live this week in the Women of Grace and Grit Facebook community, and I was talking about just several people had asked what my personal morning routine looks like. And I'm going to run through it here really quickly because for some of you it may be helpful, but please hear this. I am such a big believer that a massive piece of health is recognizing the power of certain practices, right? Like eating healthy food, moving your body, getting enough sleep, maybe developing a morning routine. But then within those practices, you have to be willing to experiment and try things on to find out what works for you. So what I'm about to speak to here is what works for me. I am in no way suggesting it is what is going to work for you. The other thing I want to tell you is that I have been in the practice of dedicating really the first 45 minutes to an hour of my day to myself for many years. I didn't start that way, right? I started with just getting up. And I think early on, I started with a 5-minute meditation practice. That's all it looked like. And then over time, as I started to recognize the power of creating that time and space, it inspired me to dedicate more time and space to it. So of course, what I do in the morning became more evolved. So I say that because if you are someone who does nothing for yourself, if you're somebody who the alarm goes off, you jump out of bed and you immediately start dealing with everybody else's stuff, you do not need to start with an hour dedicated to yourself. You need to start with maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes. And what you do within that time is totally optional. You're going to have to be willing to experiment. It's like trying a bunch of shoes on. You got to try a bunch of different types of shoes on, different brands, different supports to figure out what fits well for you, what's working well for you. The other thing I just want to remind you of is that morning routines should be malleable, right? They should change as life changes. So the morning routine I'm going to kind of talk you through really quickly here that I do isn't necessarily what I've been doing for the past 10 years, 365 days a year. Depending on what I'm rumbling with in my life, I honor what is happening in my life with structured flexibility, which I've spoken to many times on this podcast. Structured flexibility is having structure. I always get up with a little bit of time to dedicate to myself. But the flexibility is that it doesn't always look the same. It might look the same for months on end. And sometimes it's changing every few days because I'm back in the arena with experimentation, trying to figure out what works given my current life circumstances. So if you get so attached to the rigidity of a morning routine and what it's supposed to look like, I think you're going to end up creating more suffering than you are going to actually help yourself. So don't do that. Start small, be flexible in your approach. So here's mine very quickly. I set up my alarm either across the room, which is where it's been for many weeks, or I set it up outside the room. Because for me to get up out of bed in the morning, I need to get on my feet. If my alarm clock is next to my bed, it will not end well. I will turn it off. I will go back to sleep. So I have to get up on my feet and moving across the room in order to stay on my feet. And my policy with myself is once I'm on my feet, that's it, game over. I can't get back into bed. Because if I give myself that option, I will go back to bed. I will go back to sleep. I will not. And then what happens is I wake up frustrated already. So I wake up immediately in a space that is not helpful to me. And I start rushing because I don't have the time now to get to do the things that actually help me feel grounded. And I have done that so many times in my life that it's just not worth it to me anymore because I really don't like how my days roll when I don't get up on time. So once I'm on my feet, I don't get back into bed. I go into the bathroom immediately. I pee, I wash my face, I brush my teeth, I get dressed. And for me, getting dressed usually looks like putting on workout clothes because I do exercise in the morning. That's just what works for me. I will do a little bit of movement, not a lot, but literally like 3 to 5 minutes. Sometimes I'll play a song. Sometimes I literally have this little, full body routine of all the joint mobility that I go through. It takes me no more than 5 minutes. I meditate. For me personally, I do guided meditations. Sometimes different spaces and places of my life. I have not used any kind of guide and just meditated on my own. But right now, guided meditations are working beautifully for me. So that's what I do. I always pick a 10 to 15 minute meditation tops, and that's it. I start my coffee. I always have a cup of coffee in the morning. I love on my dog. Like that is just a part of my morning ritual for myself. And I also have a kind of a time limit with how much time I actually allow myself to sit on the couch with my dog because I could stay there for hours. So I do have kind of a boundary with that to move on to the other things I want to do for myself in the morning. I journal. I have a ton of prompts that I journal about. I usually dissect some thoughts that come out of those journaling exercises. I organize. So I get very intentional about where my time is going to be spent and how much time is going to be spent on projects and certain areas of the day. I definitely pre-plan my food. I kind of organize it. I don't, always pre-plan like down to the macronutrients, but I definitely put forethought into how I am going to eat for the day. I put forethought into how I'm going to rest and restore. And that's just a part of my daily planner. And that's really it. Like those are the main components of my morning routine, right? Getting up, meditating, journaling, looking at some thoughts, getting myself organized. And that generally takes me about 45 minutes to an hour. Some days I'm only going to have 20 minutes. And the parts of that I would extract that are most important to me is meditating and getting myself organized. Because if I'm not organized when my day begins, which is usually when my son gets up, I feel like all day long I'm just putting out fires and I'm trying to catch up. And I can't stand living like that. So those two practices are very powerful at the start of the day. I can always journal and dissect thoughts somewhere else in the day. So if I don't have time to do those first thing, I will do them somewhere else. My workout is not included in that at all. Like that's just a separate thing that I schedule time for. So that first 45 minutes to an hour is really getting my head on straight. It's about me parenting myself in terms of how I'm going to show up today and specifically how I'm going to do that. So one thing I just want to say in closing is that consistency with a morning practice is not about perfection. Right? You're going to have some days where you're just off your game. You're going to have some days where you decide to sleep in and then you pay the consequence of that. But that's all a part of the process. If you're willing to look at those moments through the lens of education, through the lens of learning about yourself, it actually helps you to become more consistent over the long run. Because like I said, the days that I don't get up to get my head on straight, I know my days don't roll as well. And I have experienced that enough times to recognize it's just not worth it to me anymore. So consistency does not mean perfection. It means that you are dedicated consistently to getting realigned with the practice. So if you miss a day or you oversleep one day or your kid was up sick all night and you just gave yourself permission to not get up and do it, fine. But then the next day you rededicate yourself to it. That's what consistency is. It means that you keep at it despite the misalignments and the days that you don't show up for it. So I do think that this is one of the ways that we can show up most fully in our life, and we can also really protect the integrity of our relationships. Because when we're straight with ourselves, we usually show up in our relationships in a much more compassionate and communicative way. So we're not so reactive. And I'm bringing this up because a lot of us right now are living in very, small spaces with our loved ones. And that I know is bringing up a lot of challenges for people because I've talked to a lot of people. So I truly think one of the best ways you can nourish your relationships right now and keep peace on the home front is to dedicate some time to yourself in the morning. So that's it, my friends. That's all I have for you today. Before I go, I want to remind you that we have the Confident Women Rising Summit right around the corner. It starts on April 20th. This is an event for women 40 plus, but please also know that if you're not in the 40 and over bracket, you're still going to reap a lot of value. But we do speak to perimenopause and menopause and some of the challenges that are more specific to the 40 plus population. But this event is bringing together 16 incredible thought leaders in the space of women's health to share their genius with you. And of course, like the title suggests, the purpose of this event is to help women develop more confidence mentally, physically, spiritually, and even financially. So many of you know, because you've been longtime listeners of the show, I've worked in the women's wellness space for now over 2 decades. And I really feel like I know firsthand that behind the dieting madness and the aggressive exercise pursuits, what women are really after is more confidence. The confidence to let go of what no longer serves them, the confidence to go after what they truly want for their life, the confidence to ask for what they need, to set boundaries, and the confidence to take care of themselves without being bound to a list of rules and regulations that worked for somebody else's life, meaning the diet industry, right? So the professionals that I've gathered to participate in the Confident Women Rising Summit are incredibly skilled at helping women to achieve just that. So this event is all about self-leadership and what it really takes to show up for yourself on a more consistent basis. So you can register by going to confidentwomenrising.com. Again, it is free. There is a paid upgrade if you want access to all of the videos to watch at your own pace. But the event in and of itself is a free event. And if you know a woman who could benefit from this type of event, please do me a favor and kind of pass along that URL to her, that website to her, so she can get registered as well. Because I can speak about this till I'm blue in the face. I'm obviously very passionate about it, but people tend to take value and listen to people they trust, right? So if you've been listening to the podcast and you know that I'm not blowing smoke and I have some value to offer, you sharing that with another woman goes a really long way in helping them to trust that it's worth signing up for. So I would appreciate any and all recommendations to your friends and family for participating in this event. So once again, the website where you can register is confidentwomenrising.com. All right, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you again next week. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story, and it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort, and with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.